All right, Ike. Well, no news this week because we actually want to get right into our guest, Julian Shoolheifer. Let me tell you, that's a name that you look at it and you're like, that can't be how it's pronounced. It's pronounced exactly as it's spelled. So I've been struggling with it. Anyways, Julian, amazing guest. We've been excited to have him on for several months now, ever since we visited him in the UK. But before that, what's up in the old Her Majesty's Pangolin 4x4 up there in snowy Oregon? I hear it's not been the nicest weather up there lately.
I think most of the weather is happening at altitude. So fortunately, we've actually been having pretty nice weather here in the valley.
Nice.
But in the workshop, we've been working on an 80-inch, sort of a later 80-inch, a 53. And this particular one is somewhat historic. We've talked about it a little bit on the show before. It was purchased originally by the heir to the Comstock lode fortune, and for those of you that aren't familiar, that was a discovery of a silver vein that was very very prosperous, and so they made a huge fortune. At one time, they made 1/300th of the gross domestic product of the United States. So pretty wealthy folks, and they bought a massive ranch, 37,000 acres.
Wow!
And they bought some Land Rovers, and this was one of them to work the ranch. Yep. And it was sold off probably in the 70s, and then used in California for several years, and then kind of fell into disrepair and disuse. And it's a really cool truck, really original vehicle, and we're doing a patina restoration on that. And so we've started to do some of the heavy lifting. Drivetrain has been pulled out in preparation for rebuild, and now we're doing the structural repairs and to the chassis, to the firewall and chassis, getting all of those straight and square and free of any rust.
Yeah.
So it's been a fun process, but this is definitely the dirtiest, messiest part of the whole thing.
That's not the most fun part. Yeah, we're getting ready to overhaul both axles in the Defender 90 because it's going on to a trip in February and needs to have the swivel ball stop keeping all of the lubricant on the outside of the inner tire and inside the swivel ball. So that's finally gotta happen. That's never a super fun job, but thankfully I have all the jigs and everything to rebuild it on the bench and don't have to do it on the car, which makes it a little.
I'll trade you. You can do the. You can do the swivels on the 90.
Yeah,
on the Series 1.
Yeah, it's a tempting offer, but yeah. Well, we're going to find out because there's a huge controversy. We have talked about this before. Are they in fact tapered bearings on the upper of the swivel ball in the NAS 90, or are they a thrust bearing, a Relco bush, if you will? We'll find out because the internet is divided 50-50. This should be a conclusive answer, but man, it sure isn't. And I've actually, hence the reason they're leaking like a sieve, have never had the swivel balls. I've never rebuilt them on this particular car, so that's why it needs rebuilding. But we'll find out more.
It's probably time after 30 years.
Yeah, it's well past time. It's been probably past time for about 5 years. But my ability to procrastinate on things like that is legendary. So speaking of which, also the carburetor in the Series 3 on the way here is now stalling out at every stop sign. So it is time to address the carburetor finally in my daily driver Series 3 because it's cold enough here now that it's not super happy with me and needs to be. Well, it's past the point of adjustment. It just needs a replacement. So that's fine. We'll get on that at some point. A time for everything. But speaking of replacing the dirty and or restoring the rusty, we're going to have our very good friend Julian, who is, certainly one of the preeminent restorists in the Land Rover world. We were really lucky to be able to go and visit him in his top secret underground lair there in the UK while we were there, and he was wonderful. Met the family and saw some really cool cars that he has there, and then of course talked about maybe the most famous car, number one, that he was in charge of sort of working on. So let's rev up the interview machine there. I believe this morning it is run on a high grade ethanol, and just to just a pinch of maple syrup. So get that going, and let's bring Julian into the conversation.
All right.
And finally, after some delay, and we apologize, Julian, we have been sort of trying to set up some time with you ever since we saw you in the UK, but we're joined by legendary Land Rover restorist, Julian Shoolheifer. How are you, sir? Welcome.
I'm very well, thank you, and I hope you both are too.
Yeah, we're doing. We're getting through it. We survived our trip to the UK. We weren't, we weren't killed by some kind of airborne contagion or one of your famous attack pheasants that guards the workshop there, the Shoolheifer workshop in the Midlands.
The attack pheasant was. The attack pheasant was just there for that week. He hasn't been seen since.
Wow.
So I hope he's safe and well.
Yeah, it's a little known fact that Ike actually packed him back to the United States with us, and he now inhabits the pangolin shop. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I'm sure no laws were broken in the import of that pheasant. Yeah,
I'm going to get a visit from U.S. Fish and Wildlife now.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Ike is responsible for a breed of Oregon pheasants that are bred to kill and have a taste for human flesh. So.
This is the next plague on humanity.
Yeah, pheasants. Yeah, rough, beautiful, but rough.
Bloodthirsty pheasants.
Oh man, yeah.
At least you can see.
Yeah, exactly. You see them coming. It's just a sense of dread. So besides the attack pheasants, Julian, let's talk a little bit. You were very gracious in hosting Ike and I, or you were unable to come up with a reasonable excuse for why you couldn't be there when Ike and I were in the UK, and so we definitely appreciate a visit to the workshop and a meeting with the whole Shoolheifer family, which it very much is.
Clan.
Yeah, it very much is a family affair there.
Yeah, it really is. My eldest son left school right in the middle of the pandemic and has just fallen right into place. He's a fantastic welder. He's picked up everything really, really quickly and easily, and I'm thinking that early retirement might be next. He's really done well, and he's got his own projects in the workshop at the moment. He's halfway through a customer's 88 Series 1 that he's making the most fantastic job of, and so he's doing really well. And Catherine, my wife, is the sort of the brains behind the operation. She does all the important stuff.
Yep.
Making sure we all do what we need to do and all the hours that we need to do, and making sure that everything's paid. And so it works really well. And we have another couple of really, really lovely guys who are time-served Land Rover specialists who've worked between them at... who have they worked for? Oh, they've worked for Foley's, and they've worked for... who are the people that make the roof racks for the Camel Trophy?
Oh, Brown Church, yeah.
And Brown Church and Foley's and all sorts of people. So they're really, really, really good guys.
Very cool. Oh yeah, and what a great, such a quintessential English workshop. As we as we tended to do in the UK, sort of turn into a hedge, and then on the other side of that hedge is a wonderful little workshop packed full of all kinds of super cool stuff. I know Ike and I were both big fans of your Trials Land Rover that's sort of packed away in the back there. Of all the amazing things that you have, that was sort of the thing that, we obviously over here don't get especially a Series 1, Series 2 sort of Trials cars. We don't really have that here. And so to see one of those sort of in the flesh with the, hinged open fenders and all the sort of neat things about it, just fantastic.
Yeah, that's a really cool old truck. That's it's affectionately known as Zit. Zit is one of the holy trinity of trialers that were built by a really lovely guy called Staff Dovey, who a lot of the old school trials people will know in the UK. And he built 3 trialers that were Zit, my one, Pimple, and Acne. And Zit, Pimple, and Acne were all really, really well-adjusted, nicely modified, but really scruffy-looking Land Rovers. And what they lack in looks, they make up for in being excellent at what they do. So my one was sort of like a general purpose vehicle, and it was built not as an out and out trailer, but as as like a recovery truck and a shop truck, and it just also happened to be really, really good at trials. And I've competed it quite a lot over the years. It's a good thing.
Yeah, it's super cool. And again, because we don't sort of get that stuff here, just amazing to see the big winch in the bed of the car and the all that sort of specially tuned bits just for the kind of performance necessity of a trials car.
Yeah, and it flies. It's a really good. It's fast on the road. It's got a high compression 2 litre in it, 3 litre high compression pistons, alloy Rover 60 head, big SU carb, a free flowing exhaust manifold, and it's good for. It'll sit at 70 miles an hour. It's a cracking little Series 1.
Yeah, that's super cool. That's super cool. Well, I think we would be remiss, or certainly buried the lead by saying, restoration is your sort of bread and butter at the shop there, and you've done some absolutely spectacular projects. But I think the one that you're maybe the most well known for, or at least the one that has its own book, is JUE 477, of course, the first serial number 1 Land Rover, and your restoration of that project. So how did it come to you? How is it that you became involved in the restoration of that car?
Well, I got a phone call out of the blue. Because there's this sort of 2-year gap in everyone's lives. About 5 years ago, from a family whose father had died, and they approached me with my valuation hat on, as it were, and knowing my knowledge of Land Rovers. My name had come up in conversation with them and other people. They were looking for somebody that could help them value an old Land Rover that was part of their dad's estate. And my name had been mentioned 2 or 3 times, and I got a phone call asking if I could help them identify an old Land Rover that they believed was quite early or important, and trying to sort of pin a value on it and how they might be able to sell it to release some money from the estate. And many weeks went by, and I was desperate. I kind of had an inkling that it was going to be something interesting, and in the back of my mind, I knew that it was a significant Land Rover. As soon as I knew their name, the gears in my brain were working, and I thought, yeah, I think this is number 1. But I didn't know which vehicle it was. He had many Land Rovers over the years. I didn't know if they'd sold number 1. I didn't know if it still existed. I didn't know anything about it. But to cut a long story short, after much toing and froing, I actually finally got to open the barn door in this tiny little mining village in the northeast of England. And as the doors creaked open and the sort of, I say sunlight, it was pouring with rain, as the light fell on the front of this vehicle, it was very, very clear, very apparent that it was not only an early 80, but it was in fact the Land Rover that had come out of the woodwork 20 odd years before, and was known to be Land Rover number 1. So identifying it was fairly straightforward, but nobody had really looked at it. So although it had come out of the woodwork at a Land Rover show in the late 1990s, nobody had really pored over it and found the engine number and the gearbox number and the transfer box numbers and the axle numbers and all of this sort of stuff was unknown. So I was really fortunate in being able to be the first person to set eyes on it and to scrape the grease off, the crud off the casings, to actually read all the numbers. So it was an incredible day, an incredible experience. And so my involvement was not initially was not in restoring it. It was in identifying it and trying to work out what they could do with it. And originally the idea had been to pin a tail on the donkey, as it were, and say, look, we think it's worth X, or it might be worth X. and then put it into a public auction. And that was how the plan was going to go. And I was going to have no further involvement than that. And the family then, for one reason or another, they were approached by various people. And they decided that they really didn't want to deal with people knocking on their door and people saying, I want to buy it privately and will you sell it to me, and don't put it into auction and don't do all of this sort of stuff. And they got slightly nervous, I suppose, of how big, this I won't say discovery, this sort of rediscovery of the vehicle was, because the whole market had moved on in that last 20 years. And what was in the late 1990s was something of interest to a few nutters, a few enthusiasts, was suddenly something that, because Land Rovers, especially early ones, had got so popular and values had increased, was a big deal. And a lot of people were really starting to put pressure on them and hassle them. So they then came back to me and said, look, we don't want to make this, we don't want to go to public auction for a number of reasons. There's a grieving widow, there's a family involved. We want to sort of do this a little more quietly. What can you do to help? And I said, well, our experience in selling things is and valuing things is not just with auction. It's also with private tender sales. So if we can identify a group of people around the world who might appreciate what this is and who might have what we consider to be deep enough pockets and deep enough interest to pay what we think it's worth, and more importantly, to understand what it is that they're buying and how significant it is. Because you've got Huey, you've got Pre-Pro number one, which is, everybody that knows about Land Rovers knows of Huey. And Dewey was, as in production number one, was relatively unknown, but arguably as significant, because you got the first prototype, so you got Huey, but the first production vehicle is the first of, arguably the first of 2 million that you could go out and buy. Right. So while Huey was the first ever and the first of 48 prototypes, Dewey was the first of, 2 million that you could go and buy. Of a brand and a model that, a derivative at least of which survives today. So it was a big deal, and they liked the idea. And to cut a very long story short, we identified a good number of people around the world. We sent them the briefest of details, one photograph and a one-line description, and made a little film of it in the barn, quite amateur, but really sort of evocative of what it was. It really set the tone of it being, abandoned and in a barn and covered in household stuff all over it, and it had the desired effect. We had a huge amount of interest, and in fact, everybody that we sent the little film to, the little invitation to, everyone got back. Every single person got back, and it has to be kept a secret what we sold for it. That's not for sort of the public record what we sold it for. But we did extremely well with it. Really, really well. The family were very happy. The buyer was very, very happy. And
do you still have that film?
Yeah, I could. I'll send you one.
Yeah,
or
that'd be cool to see.
I'll let you have it somehow. You upload it onto the channel.
Oh yeah.
And, and it really just sort of hit the sweet spot, and everybody was interested, and a number of people sent their own sort of experts or agents to come and have a look at it. But what was really nice was that we were given, or the family wanted us not just necessarily to get the most money. It wasn't about money.
Right.
It was that was part of it, but it was also about, do the people that ultimately want to end up with this understand what it
Right.
is. It mustn't be sold just for financial reasons. It mustn't be sold, just to sort of profit from. It's got to be saved by somebody that kind of really feels what it is, and who understands how bad it is. This thing was complete largely. I mean, missing some bodywork and some stuff that everybody knows. But in terms of its components, from like the front bumper to the rear cross member, it was all there. The radiator, the engine, the gearbox, the transfer box, the axles, the diffs, the brakes, the steering box, the bits you needed to have for it to be authentic were all there. And so that was that side of things. And like I say, we were really pleased. The family were over the moon. The buyer was really happy. And, like a month went by. And I phoned up the buyer and I said, you've got this, you bought this Land Rover. Yeah. What are you going to do with it? and they said, yeah, we really should do something with it. What do you think we should do with it? And I said, well, I don't know. It's yours. And they said, we don't want to do the wrong thing. We know you understand them. What would you do? And they said, put pen to paper and write us a proposal of what you think should be, what should be done. Forget the money, forget the time. What's the right thing to do? So I wrote sort of like an essay really on what you shouldn't do.
Yeah, a car like that is working on a car like that is a big responsibility. Yeah. What was your philosophy working on it?
Well, everyone's going to have an opinion of what's right and what's wrong, and did they do it right or did they do it wrong? And I knew that from the start, and I knew it could have been a bit of a poison chalice. And I basically gave them sort of 4 options. There was the don't do anything.
Right.
Leave it as it is. And in fact, why don't we price up building an acrylic box for it and stick it in there, and we'll get like a fan that recirculates the air, and it'll sit in there for 1,000 years. And on the other end of the spectrum was, let's make it look new. Let's make it look like day one in the factory. They were the extremes, but in the middle, and my sort of preferred routes were shore it up so you can kind of, maybe we build a subframe underneath it and kind of make it run, and so you can put it in gear and see the axles turning. Or the preferred route, the one that I was so desperate that they did, was restore every single inch of it, but in such a way that you don't throw anything away that was savable.
Yeah.
And if there was a surface, like a cosmetic surface or a cosmetic part of the paint, like the bodywork, or some paint on the steering box, or some bare aluminium, or some bits that were there and showed their age, was to absolutely not do nothing to them, but leave them to tell the story.
Right.
So they absolutely fell in love with that, and they said, that's the way to do it. But what we want whoever's going to restore it to do is to make it work. So here's the deal. What we think we want to do is we want this sort of preservation, conservation, restoration, whatever you want to call it. But we want it done in such a way that we can get in and use it every day.
Yeah.
And it's like, there's making things work and there's preserving things. You can't have both.
Right.
And so this great idea that I'd had, where this sort of this amazing thing was going to happen, actually threw up as many, more questions than answers. It was almost an impossible combination. And how do you make something work when it's really bad, and which bits do you throw away and which bits do you keep? So I left it at that, and they came back to the buyers guys, who are all really lovely, really, really seriously knowledgeable people, came back to our workshop and had a meeting with me. And they said, we got your proposal. We absolutely love this one. They preserve every square millimetre of it that can be safely saved. But we emphasise the word safely, and we stress that it must be usable, dry, reliable. So I said, well, good luck finding somebody to do that. I mean, I'm great with the ideas, but you've got to find somebody to execute this. And they said, didn't we tell you? We know that you've restored various Land Rovers, and we know some people that you've restored Land Rovers for, and we'd like you to do it. And my first reaction was literally, oh, crap.
Sure. I mean, it's such an important vehicle that opens you to criticism, for sure.
Yeah, what have I done? I mean, what have I done? And I literally said, you're going to have to give me a minute. And I got up and I walked out the workshop door. And I walked up the track, where the track is, where the killer pheasant is.
Yeah.
And walked up the track, and I got about 100 yards up the track, and I was thinking, this could be a really bad thing to do, because if this is wrong, if I get this wrong, this is just, I've destroyed heritage. I've destroyed their thing that they've bought. And ultimately, I could never ever be able to work again.
You'd be run out of England. Let's go live in Sweden or something.
There's been some cautionary tales in this vein. Talk to us a little bit about the Winston Churchill Land Rover.
Okay, precisely. Now, and that's a vehicle that I had. The Churchill vehicle is a truck that I had an awful lot to deal with, and I'm one of the few people that have driven it on numerous occasions in its unrestored state. And I agree that there's a way of doing things and a way of not doing things, and I can assure you that the Churchill one is not the way that I kind of would have done that car, knowing how good it was and how savable it was before.
Yeah.
So I got about 100 yards up the track. And I stopped and I thought, do you know what? You can do it. And if anyone can do it, you can do it. And you can do it properly. And the hardest part is just going to be starting it. So I agreed. They came up with a very sensible budget, but there was a budget. They came up with a time period over which they wanted it done, which was basically 2 years, but it was doable. I knew that I had a very, very good team of people that completely understood it. I had to restore it very secretly, not because there was anything. I mean, in fact, it was the opposite. It's not because we were trying to hide what we were doing, but we wanted there to be no distractions from this very, very clear vision that we had. And so what we didn't want was to get to any point, where we found somebody was saying, oh, I don't know why you're doing it that way, just throw that diff away and just get another one. And, or sand it down and we'll stick some paint on and fake it. And, you can't save that paint, so we'll, knock the paint off and we'll respray it. We didn't want any of that. Yeah. So we didn't want any sort of, we didn't want too much outside influence. But what we did to make sure that everything was sort of completely open and honest and above board was the owners appointed a chap called Andrew Nahum, who is the Conservator Emeritus of the Science Museum in London. And he has the most incredible expert knowledge in restoring and preserving machinery. And Andrew came out and gave, first of all, his opinion. And they said, Andrew, the owners said, Andrew, what do you think of this? Is it restorable? And he like me, had the benefit of spending quite a few hours of poring over it and seeing what was what. And he said, it's all the bits you really, really need are there. Even the chassis, which was the biggest issue, was that the chassis, the back had broken on the chassis.
Right.
But once we got the bodywork off, the front section around the engine, this thing was worked hard. You know, the engine had puked oil everywhere, and the diffs had sprayed oil up on the underneath. So actually, there were very large sections of chassis that were extremely sound and solid and savable. And the pictures where you see the back broken is because it had no roof on it, it had no windscreen on it. The 48 floors, which are steel, had rotted out. The weather had got into that section and almost rotted that section through. So you had a front section that was actually quite well preserved in a lot of places, and a back section that was quite well preserved in a lot of places. Yeah, it wasn't an easy restoration, but it was there.
Yeah.
And he was all for it. So we had backing from the Science Museum, and we had them and their guys keeping an eye on what we did. I've got sort of a group of. We do 99.9% of the work that we do. We do ourselves in the workshop. Very small workshop, as you know, but you know, there's nothing that we don't do or can't do. So we sort of we started, and the chassis took 4 months. That was 2 of us. That was Richard, that works with me, and I. 4 months, and that was a big deal. That was sleepless nights, and the way we approached that was it was daunting to start with, but a chassis is only a sort of a welded collection of parts. Yeah. So we kind of thought, well, if you take it apart into those pieces, so they were unbelievably. I mean, most Land Rovers that go rusty, the outriggers rot off first. As Ike knows, the outriggers, the ends dissolve.
We live on the west coast of the United States. There is no rust here.
Yeah, there's no rust here. It hasn't made it out here yet.
I think we make up for all of that.
No, we do a lot of chassis repair, and mostly it's from cars that are on the actual very, very coastal areas where they get some salt air or whatever, and then from the Midwestern United States, you see some rusty cars,
some pretty bad cars.
Well, imagine the worst one you've ever seen, and then multiply by 10.
The worst one I've ever seen was on the coast, and there was nothing. Like if you turn the steering wheel, the whole entire bulkhead would shift like left to right, because there was nothing. It was not attached to the chassis, and the axles weren't attached to the chassis. There was no way to move the car. Like if you tried to tow it, it would all just come apart into pieces. So, I mean, I've seen that kind of car, and it's daunting to think about repairing that. Most projects of that nature, you out of hand replace the chassis. But when you're trying to save a historically important chassis, obviously you gotta go through the paces of not only fixing it, but building all of those sections in a way that is consistent with the original construction. So that's a huge process and task.
Well, we sort of, as I say, we dissected it. I think it's the only way to describe it, and that helped mentally. This was that was the only thing that caused sleepless nights. Originally, we had actually asked a chassis specialist in the UK to help us do it, and without any warning, just as we were sort of going to ship
Pete?
The chassis to...
Was that Pete? Was that Pete?
No.
All right.
No. So without any warning, they sort of, I think they got cold feet, and they said, do you know what? No, it's not for us. And so I had to make a decision, which was, do we look for somebody else, or do we just grasp the nettle and do it ourselves? Because once you've got your head around the fact that it's, if you've replaced a rear cross member, we've got to replace a rear cross member. If you've repaired spring hangers, then you've got to repair the spring hangers. If you've got to, repair an outrigger or make an outrigger. Yeah. And it was just pretty much every repair that we've ever done before, but all in one chassis. And so we'd had, we've got various jigs and for subsections of things. And my friend's got a chassis table, and so it was all there, and it all sort of fell into place. But the thing that amazes me with it is that there were, once we sort of got into it, there were huge sections that actually needed, this may sound hard to believe, but there were huge sections that actually needed relatively little repair. And there were other parts that were non-existent.
Weren't there anymore.
That weren't there anymore. So the rear spring hangers, for example, and everything they attached to weren't there. But then the top rail of the chassis all the way through, virtually from front to back, was there. So we had the original, a lot of the original steel in it, the original dimensions. We had jigs, we had sub jigs, we repaired. I think, in the book there's a great picture which showed the process, which was repairing the engine cross member and how we.
I'll just mention that the book he's referring to is the restoration of JUE, and it's available from Porter Press. Is that correct?
Yeah, JUE 477, written by Martin Port and available from Porter Press, and it's on its. I think the book's on its. I think it's on its third or fourth reprint.
Fantastic! Check it out if you haven't.
Yeah, it's a good story as well. It's we didn't want to make it. We wanted to make it. Martin wrote the book in a way that we really hoped would be written, and that was to include as much detail as we could, so all the all our fellow rivet counters could could actually see how a 48 was constructed and what we had to deal with and all this sort of stuff, but also write the story in such a way that it wasn't too dry and that it was a book that you could read as a book and not just like a manual of how to disassemble and reassemble a really rusty Land Rover.
Were there concessions that you had to make during the restoration process, or are there things that you would do differently in retrospect?
Well, that's an interesting question, because I've asked myself that since, because your life revolves around it for 2 years, and then you do a load of stuff with it, and then it goes away. The owner actually wants to use it.
Wants the car,
actually wants to drive his car, and then so you might not see it for a couple of months or 2 or 3 months, and then you get to go and see it again. You get to see it at something, or you get asked to go and do something with it, or it comes back for like a service because they've actually used the thing. And there's genuinely nothing that I would change on it. I mean, and I have never said that about another project ever, and I'm certainly none of my own stuff. I don't want to change. Nothing's ever finished, and I want to change it all the time.
Every drive of any one of my cars is a list of all the things that are wrong with it and need to be sorted out. So
but it's
it's a list of regrets.
It's just a long list of regrets every time I drive back and forth to the workshop. So
I'll tell you something about it, which are 2 or 3 people who sort of outside, our immediate, circle, our immediate workshop, that have driven it, have said, which is the greatest compliment I've ever had about it, is that it's one of the nicest driving 80s. You have to say nicest driving 80s because not only is it a Land Rover, but it's an 80. And, they're not the best to drive. They drive like a pre-war car, much more than a sort of a later 86 or 88. I mean, they're a very different animal. And it drives really well, and it's really reliable, and it's a cracking car. It's a cracking truck. It just does everything really well, and it's really, really good off road. I mean, surprisingly, we got it on the original pattern tires, or as close as you can get. And when we the best bit of the whole project, or one of the best bits of the whole project, was actually taking the finished Land Rover back to the farm on which it was abandoned, if you like, if stored, since 1970, and it was the most emotional few days to actually, when it dawned on us that we were there with, hey, not only am I driving Land Rover number 1, like, wow, but I'm driving Land Rover number 1 on the roads and on the farm that it spent 50 years of its life was extraordinary, and the family were reunited with it. they'd not seen it driven since it was laid up in 1970.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got the owner, David Fairless's. He was the owner of it. He was the guy that bought it in 1970, and on whose farm it was left. He abandoned it on his farm,
Mm-hmm.
but his widow actually got to see it on the farm being driven, and his children got to see it driven on the farm, and they all had a go in it. And we drove it back down. This is a really remote area. I mean, this is if we've got a boondocks,
yeah.
this part of the UK is really, really isolated. And we drove it back down to the farm that was famously photographed in, sort of abandoned to the elements, before it got put in a barn for some protection. And it was the wettest day ever. The water, this is a peat moorland, so there's like no bottom to these bogs. You've got knitted grass and reeds on the top that if you break through the surface, you just drop a Land Rover down to its axles, and there they sit.
The bog of eternal stench. Yeah.
And no joking, no word of a lie, there were Morris Minors and other vaguely recognisable cars, including a gypsy, Austin Gypsy, which I know how much you love them, which were abandoned on the farm. And one of these cars had sunk so much into this peat that only the roof above the, like halfway up the window glass, only the roof was visible out of the ground. That's how wet it was.
Wow.
But we drove.
Maybe Land Rover number 2 is sitting in there somewhere.
In that bog. Start excavating the bog.
He had quite a few Series 1s, but mostly all later ones. But we drove it down through this boggy farmland, back down to the farm in the exact spot where it was abandoned in 1970. And we took a load of photographs, and we had the family there, and it was just the most emotional and evocative and a wonderful experience. And the rain was coming down, and the water's running down this peat bog like in rivers, carving channels through this peat bog. And I looked back up at the road, which was about, well, I say road, it was a track off the road. I looked back up at this road, and it's up a 45-degree incline on this peat bog with water running down it. And I thought, you know what, we're not going to get this out of here. So I asked them if they had, did any of the farms locally have any recovery equipment, like an ATV or an Argo Cat or or something that might help us. And the nearest farm is literally sort of 3 miles away, and it's a real derelict old farm with no real kit on it at all. So we were quite in trouble. And the good news is that I managed to drive Dewey all the way back up this hill, across this sort of peaty, boggy area, right up the side of the hill, through like the gates and the dry stone walls, up this higher bit of ground where there's abandoned farm machinery either side. And it wasn't until about the last 20 feet that we got stuck, and we were within 3 vehicle lengths from some hard standing from a bit of road. And because we had a team of people with us who were, the family and all these people, a few bodies on the back of the Land Rover, and we pushed it onto the road, with the tyres full of mud, and it was just fantastic. It was amazing, absolutely amazing how good it was.
So cool. Yeah, every time I take out my 80-inch or am exposed to anyone that has them in an off-road situation, it's just incredibly impressive what that little that little car and that tiny little motor and stuff is capable of. It's it really is, and so much fun. I mean, I think the original Land Rover is really just a joy. And to take the first Land Rover and nearly lose it in a peat bog, no better day than that, in my opinion.
No, it was one of those days to remember. And in fact, we were up there for a few days, and we had days where you wake up and the sun was shining and the roads were dry, and you got this Land Rover, no heater in it, no door tops, and a tiny canvas roof. And I think one day it was -10, and then you've got the wind chill driving it along at sort of 40, 45, 50 miles an hour. and it was bitterly cold, and then the snow started, and we were on the top of this moor, and it was at one point in time there was a good sort of 4 or 5 inches of snow as well, and it was magical, absolutely magical.
Well, that brings up a good question. What happens to JUE now?
Well, as I mentioned earlier,
you've kind of displayed it, and you've kind of written the book about the restoration, and you've shown it to the world, and everybody's seen it. And now what happens to it?
Well, it's the first thing that you have to remember is that it's privately owned. So, although it is a really significant vehicle, I mean, of significant national heritage, I suppose, maybe even sort of world heritage in some ways. It's privately owned, but it's privately owned by this guy, a guy called Jim Ratcliffe, who has a big company called Ineos, who are building a new four-wheel drive, the Grenadier.
Ike is president of the U.S. Grenadiers Club, so he's well acquainted.
Well, I think I'm probably sort of Essex area chapter.
Yeah, right. Good. Good.
I'm a big fan of them.
I think they're very cool.
Yeah, I've got to drive Grenadiers a couple of times. Not many people have.
Yeah.
But the important thing is that Sir Jim Ratcliffe, this guy Jim Ratcliffe, is he's an enthusiast.
Yeah.
And he's a real enthusiast. He's got other vehicles. He's got another 86 station wagon, which is a really, really lovely thing. And it's not immaculate. I guess he could afford anything that he wants. Right. But he's got this really original, slightly tatty, really lovely 86 station wagon. He's got Land Rover number 1, which is in all its genuinely worn and patined and scruffy condition, and he's absolutely besotted with this stuff. So it was a very rare combination of finding somebody who not only had the understanding of what needed to happen to Land Rover number 1, but also had the finances and the knowledge to achieve it. But at the end of the day, he wants to drive it. So, what happens next? Well, at the moment, he's got it and they're using it. Right. The family use it. It's driven around, and his sons are very into four-wheel drives, and they drive it. So it's not been put in a box and not used. I mean, when I've had it back for a bit of adjustment or a bit of servicing, the first job is always to hose off tons of clay and clag and seaweed. That's awesome. and stuff from the underneath.
Is that a service that you offer?
Yeah. You bring anything by. A quick power wash.
I do. For anyone and anything.
Anyone. Ike got that service while he was at the workshap, actually.
Just got my undercarriage pressure washed.
A little bit of a pressure wash there, it was,
Undercarriage is
I'll say it was, I appreciated on our ride back to London,
Oh, yeah.
So it's, to my knowledge, it's used and enjoyed, and as and when, it needs to be somewhere, or they want to use it for something. It gets taken and used. And in fact, the last time it was out anywhere with me was just before Christmas. So I get to see it and play with it on a regular basis.
Well, that's great. What a wonderful story. And you've continued to take on Series 1 restoration work, and you've got the next generation of Shoolheifers working on those. How do people follow your shop and your work? Do you have an Instagram? Do you have tell us about that?
Yeah, Instagram is just Shoolheifer, so it's the impossible but phonetic name.
Yeah, it's hard to pronounce unless you just read it, and then it's phonetic. So yeah.
So Instagram is Shoolheifer. I'm on Facebook as myself. Our company has a page, but all the good stuff happens on my page. That's where you get all the opinion and you get all the all the disasters and all the truth, and all the politics.
Yeah, because you're not just working on Land Rovers. You have some personal projects on there too, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I've always. I mean, my background is although I've been into Land Rover since I was a kid. The usual story. Parents had them. I got this sort of disease that that made me, for some reason, want to spend all my money on rusting pieces of British engineering. But my my background within the auction industry and privately has been in quite sort of wide areas of vintage and classic cars and motorbikes, and I always wanted a fast pre-war car. Fast pre-war cars, like the big Bentleys or Vauxhall 3098s or Bugattis, are telephone numbers to buy and maintain. And so since I was probably a teenager, I realised this, and I always wanted a good scruffy hot rod. And they're hard to buy as well. Nice hot rods. Hot rods, if they're scruffy and original, they're generally fairly unsafe and fairly crudely built. That's how they were done. So to find something that's safe and works and is reliable but kind of looks old, you've got to build one. So my own project at the moment, aside from a 5180, is a 1931 Ford Deluxe Roadster, which was laid up in New Hampshire in 1953. And at that point, I won't say it was hot rodded, but somebody had started to modify it. Bits were painted in different colours, and it had some shiny trim added, and so it was a very mild customization. So I decided that what I'd do with this car was, as it was laid up in 1953, I'd sort of build it to 1953 hot rod spec. So what was a great engine to put in your Model A in 1953? So I found a 1952 Lincoln 317Y block V8, which is quite a rare engine here.
A hot rod Lincoln.
So it's a hot rod Lincoln, like the song.
Commander Cody.
So that's the one. But mine's an 8. I think his was a. Was it not a V12 in the song?
I think it's 8 cylinders and uses them all.
Yeah. Okay.
I think it's 8.
Yeah. I think there's different versions and they change the cylinders.
Could be.
So So that's it. That's my current thing, and that is I've got the hurry ups with that because I've got to get that done for our. It's entered in the Pendine beach races in May. Yeah,
very cool.
So it'll be done, but
we
excited
can't wait
to see that thing on the road.
Yeah,
and speaking of fast, are you ready for the lightning round?
The world famous, both anticipated hotly and feared by guests of the show, the famous Ike Goss lightning round.
I understand you've been training for this. Is that what you've told us? You've been going on runs?
I have, but don't expect my answers to be too smooth.
Right, it's like a Rocky versus the Russian guy training montage happening. With your wife and son yelling questions out the window of the 80-inch as you run down the road. So, all right, Ike, are you ready?
I have a feeling some of the answers are going to be a little predictable, but I'm excited to hear them anyway. Are you ready? Julian, are you ready?
Go on.
All right.
Yeah, I'm
okay. Short questions, short answers. Leaves or coils?
Leaves.
Gas or diesel?
Gas.
Bias ply or radial?
Bias ply.
Bronze green or Tangiers orange?
Tangiers. No, bronze green.
Galvanized or painted chassis?
Painted.
All right. And the best way to remove 90 weight from your underpants?
Petrol.
Oh.
While you're wearing them, right?
while you're wearing.
Perfect score. Perfect score. Well done.
A hot rodder's solution to 90 weight. Well, Julian, thank you so much for your time. All right. Well, as always, such a joy to speak with Julian. He's such a great sort of storyteller, and what a neat story, that is, and so cool that such a historic car is being driven and used and almost got dissolved in a peat bog, on its first outing. So it's great. It's good to know. It's good to know that it's still getting muddy and being used.
Yeah, we're lucky that Julian wasn't found preserved in a peat bog with Land Rover number 1 in like 1,000 years or something.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, you never know. I don't know. I think there's a chance we get that Austin ripped out of there. It'll be fine. It'll be great. It's going to be good. It's just as good as it was. Speaking of the Austin Gypsy and criticisms of our show on Instagram, we appreciate everybody's comments and wanted to give a shout out. And I don't remember if I've done this before, so I'm just going to do it again because Joe is a real good guy over at Lost Cause Ranch. Sent Ike and I some T-shirts and some stickers from the Lost Cause Ranch. They've got some really neat projects going on their YouTube channel. You can check out there. They've just got an XD, one of the Eco Challenge XDs. They of course in the process of trying to start and then maybe get driving the Nada 475 as well as all kinds of other stuff. Really, really fun channel. Joe's a great guy, and they've got some good stuff going there. So thank you for that. We appreciate it. Our good friend, the State of Mike on Instagram, also gave us a great shout out for having ropey bumpers on your Land Rover. And as you know, we're huge fans of unnecessarily roping your Land Rover. So it was very good fun about that, and had a great picture of his very roped up Range Rover. But it's a famous
Massively
rope, though.
roped.
It was like a rope used in an actual event. So there's something to that, as opposed to just rope you've bought at the hardware store and made a wicker chair frame out of your brush bar. That's a little bit different. And we're working on some interesting stuff. We've got after the recent episode of our good friend Dan and Ivan over at Rover Talk, their latest episode talking about Ivan's latest trip to Spain and all the misadventures going on there. We're talking about potentially doing some stuff with them later this year to grow the ever expanding Land Rover podcast universe. I don't know. This is tie-ins and crossovers, and it's like a Marvel movie over here,
It's like when the Globetrotters visit Scooby-Doo.
Oh my God, you never know who's going to show up. That's the thing, No. This is truly the it's fantastic. Yeah, one ties into another. It's cliffhangers and special appearances. It's going to be great. We'll have Kareem Abdul-Jabbar do a special. I don't know, whatever. We're going to find some stuff. It's going to be great. Unfortunately, we have run out of time for Ike's review of Nando's.
Not again.
I know. This time I thought we would have it for sure, but, Julian is absolutely just fascinating to chat with, and we had to bump them in order to make time. So we promise we will get to that
next time.
Yeah,
next time
in the future. There's some new stuff on the Underpowered Hour store for any of those folks that you are obligated to buy something for, but don't really care for them that deeply. Plenty of great gift ideas there. Check out our Instagram and Ike. I don't know if you've had an opportunity to check out our TikToks. My wonderful wife Liza has been helping to move us into the next generation of social media with doing some clever TikTok. She's a real artist when it comes to that stuff, and there are some good ones coming out. Some participation that I've had in some of the forthcoming TikToks. High level of self-deprecation for the audience's entertainment. I'm happy to do it.
Did you embarrass us again?
Oh, constantly. I can't go out into the world without doing that. But yeah, we've been shooting some stuff around the workshop, and just about ready to make a trip up north to see Ike to start getting some stuff done up there as well. Visit Ike's stolen attack pheasant and deal with settling that lawsuit with Fish and Wildlife. So yeah. Good. So on that note, it's been a pleasure as always, and we'll see you next week.
All right, Stephen. Looking forward to it.